obviously, when two countries are shooting fucking missiles at each other, it's never very good. And then obviously add Israel into the mix and we got a recipe for disaster. So I would actually love to know what actually is going on. By the way, World War II happened from 1939 to 1945. Let's actually try to figure out what's going on here. Yeah, like, comment, subscribe if you enjoy content like this. But this seems very interesting.
Of one of the
Let's learn, boys.
world's most complicated and controversial relationships. The United States is the world's most preeminent superpower with a population of more than 320 million, while Iran is a major power in her own right, with a population of more than...
Yeah, when we accept Canada as our 51st state, by the way, they should change this color from red to blue, because we're never getting a Republican president ever again.
80 million. These countries represent 4% and 1% of the living human population.
It's a lot less than I'd assume.
For the past 41 years, they've had absolutely zero diplomatic relations and have come close to the brink of total war on more than one occasion. At the beginning of 2020, war between the two sides seemed almost inevitable. The United States assassinated an Iranian major general in a drone strike.
So give me some lore here. Actually, I'm going to Google this. Is Iran a first world country? The term first world country is a legacy from Cold War and is no longer used to classify nations. Oh, so that means they're not a first world country. Okay. So while we're fighting them with rockets and missiles, they're like fighting us with like sticks and rocks.
And Iran retaliated by initiating artillery strikes against American military bases across Iraq. Had a war broken out from there, it had the potential to become the biggest conflict in human history since the Second World War. This time, that fate was thankfully avoided. But in order to understand how it got so close and why it could still happen during another crisis in the future, you've got to understand the entire history of the conflict between America and Iran so far. And that story begins back before the start of World War II.
It's got to be like a girl, right? Like the two presidents, the president of the United States and the president of Iran, they both went to the same high school. And there was this really bad bitch from Japan, sexy as fuck waifu president from Japan. And they both wanted to bang this bitch. But because they were always fighting, she didn't want either of them. And so now they want to kill each other is what I'm going to go ahead and assume. That's my prediction.
At the beginning of the 20th century, oil was first discovered within the deserts of Iran by the British. As more and more of these discoveries were made, it was revealed that Iran, in fact, contained the fourth largest proven reserves of oil anywhere on the planet.
Oh, it's over oil?
The country was an undiscovered and unrealized energy superpower.
Jesus.
The only problem for the British,
that sounds like America,
was that these discoveries were located within Iran. And Iran wasn't within Britain's vast colonial empire that already spanned a quarter of the globe. Not too worried about that pesky little detail, Britain negotiated a deal with Iran to share in the massive profits that were bound to come from the extraction of all this oil. They created the jointly owned Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, but it wasn't exactly set up very fairly. Iran, the country where all of this oil was actually located, was only entitled to 16% of the company's profits, whereas the other 84% of profits were going directly to the British. By the start of the Second World War, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company grew to control all of Iran's oil and had grown to become the largest company in the entire British Empire. But this massively valuable asset was coming under threats. Discontent at the company's unfair terms was growing within Iran itself, while at the same time in 1941, Nazi Germany...
So I'm assuming that like British and like America got way too strong before Iran, and so Iran had all these resources and we were gobbling it up, and then they were getting upset but they couldn't do anything about it. Is kind of what I'm starting to think here.
Invaded the Soviet Union and opened up the largest military front line ever seen in human history. Iran stood geographically at the Soviet Union's southern flank, and their intentions were considered suspect by both the British and the Soviets. Despite having declared neutrality at the onset of the war, Iran's ruling Shah, or emperor, was widely considered by the Allies to be too friendly towards the Nazis. If Iran were to have cooperated with the Axis, it could have opened up...
No, you don't know them like we do. The Nazis are horribly misunderstood. Yeah, I mean that would kind of piss me off too.
Another southern front for the Soviets to deal with that would have diverted vital troops away from the critical Eastern Front. It could have jeopardized the Soviet Union's own oil fields in the Caucasus right on Iran's doorstep, and it would have potentially placed Britain's largest oil company in the hands of the Nazis. So in order to prevent any of that from happening,
Yeah, that's
and in
not
order to
good.
ensure that Iran could be used as a transportation corridor to get vital supplies into the Soviet Union, neutral Iran was invaded by both the Soviets and the British. Vastly outnumbered,
Yeah, I think that's probably a good idea, guys. Okay, so I'm starting to understand where they were like, okay, we understand you're an empath and you think the Nazis are pretty cool, but we're gonna go ahead and let you not do that. Okay, that makes sense.
and far behind in technology, Iran never stood a chance and surrendered within just a week.
Sure.
The old troublesome Shah was overthrown and replaced by the invaders with his much younger
Sounds familiar.
21-year-old son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, whom the Allies felt would be far less capable of acting against their interests. Iran was effectively occupied for the entire Second World War by the Allies, which eventually saw the deployment of more than 30,000 Americans and the transportation of nearly one-third of all the supplies that America sent to the Soviet Union. After the war ended, the Allies left and ended their occupation, but the unfair terms that the British had established in regards to Iran's oil came back into question. By the early 1950s, Britain was still taking home the majority of Iran's oil profits, while the conditions for Iranian oil workers and their families remained terrible. At the same time, the British were also withholding all of the company's financial records from the Iranians, and had refused all of their requests at being audited. The support for nationalizing the company within Iran was getting overwhelmingly massive, and by 1951, Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, with unanimous approval from the Iranian parliament, finally did so. Britain responded to this by immediately embargoing all Iranian oil, and then 2 years later, in 1953, Britain's
Hold up. An official ban on trade or other commercial activity with a particular country. Gotcha. Just wanted to make sure we all know what the word embargo meant. That's a big word. Okay, so they said, nah, fuck no, you're banned from trading with that country. Gotcha. Makes sense.
MI6 and America's CIA organized a military coup within the country to overthrow Mossadegh's government. As many as 300 Iranians were killed during the coup. Mossadegh himself was placed under house arrest for the rest of his life, while the Shah was elevated to being essentially an authoritarian dictator within the country. Having had his position installed and guaranteed by Western powers twice now, the Shah became widely viewed in Iran as little more than a Western puppet. And as the Cold War developed out of the ashes of the Second World War, Iran's strategic location at the Soviet Union's southern flank, her vast strategic reserves of oil, and her authoritarian leader who owed his position and loyalty to the West, made Iran a natural and valuable ally of the United States for the very first time. The Shah pursued a staunchly pro-American and pro-Israel foreign policy, and for decades, Iran became one of America's most important Cold War-era allies. But over the decades, the Shah's policies and cozy relations with the West alienated much of his home base support. Widespread torture of political dissidents in prison was reported. He outlawed the Iranian Communist Party. He continued friendly relations with both America and Israel, despite nearly none of the rest of the Islamic world even recognizing Israel. While he
Ooh, I feel like that's not going to age well based on some spoilers I know. I feel like the Iran and Israel aren't really going to like each other too much. I have a feeling.
carried out a domestic policy of colonization, secularism, and the enfranchisement of women. All of these policies combined alienated Iran's leftists, the working class, and the hardcore Shiite Muslim conservatives and clergy. And by the late 1970s, Iran's long-standing political unrest had transformed into full-scale revolution. A movie theater was set on fire in Abadan that killed at least 420 people, with the Shah's regime blaming Marxist and Islamist insurgents, while many of the protesters felt like it was more likely the Shah's own secret police. The following month, protesters gathered in the capital Tehran's main square, and the Shah's army opened fire on them indiscriminately, killing and wounding hundreds more.
That's crazy how this just looks like the LA riots that Hassan was endorsing.
More than 5 million
wild.
Iranians took to the streets demanding the Shah's abdication, and after defections from his army became rampant, Mohammad Pahlavi realized that his position was impossible to maintain, and he fled the country in exile in early 1979. The new radical Shiite Islamist government that replaced the Shah's regime immediately